The message was only 4 words long. Please, I need help. The poor single mom stared at her phone, thumb shaking. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her baby was crying again, hungry, weak, running out of formula. She meant to text a charity hotline. Instead, she sent the message to the wrong number. She didn't know it belonged to the most feared mafia boss in the city. Minutes passed. No reply. She sighed, wiped her tears, and began typing another message. An apology this time. Then her phone buzzed. How much? The reply read. She froze. Thinking it was a scam, she typed back, embarrassed. I'm sorry, wrong number. Please ignore. Another message came instantly. Send the address. Across town, the mafia boss lowered his phone slowly. Something about the desperation in that message felt familiar. Too familiar. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and said to his men, cancel everything, because that night, a single text sent by mistake was about to change 2 lives forever. Stay with me until the end, because what happens when he arrives at her door will restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Maria Santos had been standing in the baby formula aisle for 20 minutes, counting the same $13.47 over and over again. The price tag on the cheapest can stared back at her like a cruel joke. $17.99. She was $4 short. $4 that might as well have been $4,000. Her 6-month-old son Diego shifted restlessly in her arms, his tiny fist clutching at her worn sweater. She could feel other shoppers walking past, their carts full of groceries she couldn't afford. Nobody looked at her twice, just another struggling mom in a city full of them. Maria walked to the customer service desk, swallowing her pride as she approached the teenage clerk who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. Excuse me, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the store's background music. Is there any way I could pay the difference tomorrow? My baby is almost out of formula, and I'm just a few dollars short. The clerk glanced up from his phone, annoyance flashing across his face. Store policy, ma'am. Full payment up front. No exceptions. Maria's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She nodded quickly, turned away, and walked back through the aisles with empty hands and a breaking heart. Outside in the parking lot, Diego's cries grew louder, more desperate. She fumbled through her purse for her phone, remembering the number she'd written down weeks ago, a local charity hotline that supposedly helped mothers in crisis. She'd been too proud to call before, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her fingers trembled as she typed the number. In her exhaustion and desperation, she accidentally transposed 2 digits. She didn't notice the mistake as she typed her message. Please, I need help. My baby needs formula and I have no money. I'm not asking for much. Just enough to feed my son tonight. I'll pay it back somehow, I promise. She hit send and immediately felt sick to her stomach. Asking strangers for help went against everything she'd been taught growing up. But watching her baby suffer was worse than any shame she could feel. 15 minutes passed. No response. Maria started typing an apology, assuming she'd bothered someone who couldn't help anyway. But before she could send it, her phone vibrated. How much? The response was so simple, so direct, that Maria stared at it for a full minute. No judgment, no questions about her situation. Just 2 words that somehow carried more compassion than she'd encountered in weeks. Her hands shook as she typed back, I'm sorry, wrong number. Please ignore. But another message appeared almost instantly. Send the address. Maria's heart pounded. This had to be some kind of scam. Nobody just offered to help a stranger like this. She'd heard stories about people who preyed on desperate mothers, luring them into dangerous situations with promises of easy money. She typed quickly, Thank you, but I can't accept help from strangers. I'm sorry for bothering you. The reply came back immediately. You're not bothering me. What's the address? 30 blocks away? Vincent Carrera sat in the back seat of his black sedan, reading the messages that had appeared on his private phone. The device was supposed to be known only to his inner circle, yet somehow a desperate mother had found her way to his number. Vincent had built his reputation on being untouchable, unreachable, and absolutely ruthless when it came to business. At 42, he controlled most of the underground operations in the eastern part of the city. Politicians feared him. Rival families respected him. The police had been trying to build a case against him for over a decade without success. But as he read the woman's messages, something stirred in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Something that reminded him of a different time, when he was just a scared kid watching his own mother choose between rent and groceries. "Boss?" his driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" Vincent was still staring at his phone. The woman had stopped responding, probably convinced he was some kind of predator. He couldn't blame her for being cautious. In her position, trust was dangerous. But he remembered that feeling, that hollow ache of watching someone you love suffer while you stood powerless to help. He remembered his mother's face when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she'd stare at empty cabinets like willpower alone could fill them with food. Vincent had sworn he'd never be powerless again. He'd built an empire to ensure he'd never have to watch anyone he cared about go without. But somehow, a stranger's pain had cut through all his carefully constructed walls in a matter of minutes. He made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "Tony," he said to his driver, "I need you to trace a phone number." "Sure thing, boss. What kind of trace?" "I need an address, and I need it now." Tony had worked for Vincent for 8 years. He'd learned not to ask too many questions about unusual requests. Within 20 minutes, he had the information Vincent wanted. "It's a small apartment complex on Maple Street," Tony reported. "Third floor, apartment 3B, registered to Maria Santos." Vincent nodded, his mind already working. He thought about the fear in her messages, the way she'd immediately assumed he meant harm. Most people in her situation would be suspicious of unexpected help. They'd learned the hard way that nothing came without a price. He needed to approach this carefully. One wrong move and she'd disappear. Probably move apartments, change her number. He couldn't let that happen. Something about her situation had awakened a part of him he thought he'd buried years ago. "Drive to the nearest grocery store," Vincent instructed. "The kind that stays open late." "Which one, boss?" "Doesn't matter. Just find one with a decent baby section." Vincent stepped out of the sedan 40 minutes later carrying 3 large bags. Formula, diapers, baby food, blankets, everything a new mother might need. He'd also stopped at an ATM and withdrawn enough cash to cover several months of expenses. As they pulled up to the apartment building on Maple Street, Vincent felt something he rarely experienced anymore: nervousness. He knew exactly what kind of fear she was feeling right now. The same terror that had kept him awake as a child, listening to his mother cry in the next room when she thought he couldn't hear. The helplessness that came with loving someone you couldn't protect. Vincent looked up at the weathered apartment building. Paint peeling from the walls, broken security gate hanging open, flickering fluorescent lights in the hallway. He'd grown up in a place just like this one. Different address, same desperation. "Wait here," he told Tony, grabbing the bags from the trunk. "You want backup, boss?" Tony asked, scanning the empty street with practiced caution. Vincent shook his head. "This isn't that kind of visit." He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his expensive shoes echoing in the narrow stairwell. The building smelled like old cooking grease and broken dreams. When he reached the 3rd floor, he could hear a baby crying behind door 3B. Vincent stood outside Maria's door for a full minute, listening to that sound. It cut through him like a blade. He'd heard that same cry from his baby sister years ago, before everything fell apart. He knocked gently, 3 soft taps. The crying stopped abruptly. Vincent could hear movement inside, cautious footsteps approaching the door. "Who is it?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "My name is Vincent. You sent me a message tonight." Complete silence from the other side of the door. Vincent could practically feel her fear radiating through the wood. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, his voice softer than anyone who knew him had ever heard it. "I brought formula for your baby." More silence. Then the sound of multiple locks being undone. The door opened just a crack, security chains still engaged. Maria's dark eyes peered out at him, wide with terror and confusion. She took in his expensive coat, his perfectly groomed appearance, the way he carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. "You're not from the charity," she whispered. "No," Vincent admitted. "I'm not." "Then who are you?" Vincent looked at this young mother, probably no older than 25, holding her baby protectively against her chest. Her apartment behind her was clean but sparse. A single chair, a mattress on the floor, empty cabinets visible through the kitchen doorway. "I'm someone who knows what it's like to watch your child go hungry," he said quietly. Something in his tone must have reached her, because Maria's grip on the door loosened slightly. "I don't understand," she said. "How did you get my address? How did you even get my message?" "You texted the wrong number," Vincent explained. "But maybe it was the right number after all." He held up one of the bags so she could see through the crack in the door. "Formula, diapers, baby food, everything you need. No strings attached." Maria stared at the bag like it might disappear if she blinked. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. People don't just help strangers like this. What do you want from me?" The question hit Vincent harder than he expected. What did he want? For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about territory or profit margins or the next move in an endless game of power. He was thinking about a scared kid who used to steal food just to keep his family alive. "I want your baby to have enough to eat tonight," he said simply. "That's all." Maria studied his face through the gap in the door. She'd learned to read people quickly in her 24 years. Landlords who promised to fix things and never did. Employers who claimed they'd pay fair wages and didn't. Men who offered help and expected payment in ways that made her skin crawl. But this stranger's eyes held something different. Pain, maybe. Recognition. Like he was seeing his own reflection in her desperation. "You're not a social worker," she said. "No." "You're not a charity volunteer." "No." "Then what are you?" Vincent considered the question. In his world, people knew exactly what he was. They crossed streets to avoid him. They spoke his name in whispers, always looking over their shoulders. But standing in this hallway, looking at this young mother who reminded him so much of his own family's struggle, those titles felt meaningless. "I'm someone who remembers being where you are right now," he said. Maria's baby started crying again, a weak, hungry sound that made her wince. She looked down at Diego, then back at Vincent, weighing her options. Trust a stranger or watch her son suffer. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Slowly, she unhooked the security chain. The door opened fully, revealing the reality of her situation. The apartment was maybe 400 square feet total. A single mattress in the corner served as both bed and couch. A small table held a hot plate and a few mismatched dishes. The refrigerator hummed loudly, but Vincent could see through the glass door that it was nearly empty. "I'm not usually this stupid," Maria said, stepping back to let him enter. "But Diego hasn't eaten in 6 hours and I'm out of options." Vincent stepped inside, noting how she positioned herself between him and the baby. Even in her desperation, she was protecting her child. He respected that. "How old?" he asked, nodding toward Diego. 6 months. He was premature, so he needs special formula. The expensive kind. Her voice cracked slightly. "I used to have a job at a diner downtown. Good tips, decent hours. But when Diego got sick last month, I had to take time off. They replaced me." Vincent set the bags down on the small table. "What about family?" Maria's laugh was bitter. "My parents kicked me out when they found out I was pregnant. Said I was an embarrassment to the family name. Diego's father disappeared the day I told him about the baby." Vincent felt anger building in his chest, but it wasn't directed at her. He knew men like Diego's father, cowards who created problems and then ran from the consequences. He also knew families who valued reputation over love, who would abandon their own children to protect their image. Their loss, he said, meaning it. Maria blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. You don't even know me. I know enough. Vincent opened the first bag and began unpacking formula cans. I know you're trying to take care of your son. I know you're not asking for handouts. You're asking for help. There's a difference. As Vincent continued unpacking, Maria watched in stunned silence. Formula, diapers, baby food, bottles, blankets, even toys. More supplies than she'd seen in one place since Diego was born. This is too much, she whispered. It's exactly enough. Vincent opened a can of formula and handed it to her. Feed him. Maria's hands shook as she prepared the bottle. Diego latched on immediately, drinking with the desperation of a baby who'd been waiting too long for this moment. The relief on Maria's face was immediate and overwhelming. Thank you, she breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know how to thank you. Vincent watched the baby eat, remembering his sister at that age, remembering how powerless he'd felt, how angry it made him that love wasn't enough to fill an empty stomach. You don't need to thank me, he said. Just take care of him. But even as he said the words, Vincent knew this wasn't going to be a one-time intervention. Something about this situation had awakened something in him that he'd thought was dead. A need to protect, to provide, to use his power for something other than expanding his territory. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. It was just beginning. Maria stared at the stranger standing in her apartment, her mind racing with questions she was afraid to ask. Vincent moved with quiet efficiency, unpacking the remaining bags like he'd done this 1,000 times before. But there was something in his movements, a careful deliberateness that spoke of someone who understood exactly what poverty felt like. You said you remember being where I am, Maria said softly, adjusting Diego in her arms as he continued drinking. What did you mean by that? Vincent paused, his hand hovering over a package of diapers. For a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing something raw underneath. My mother raised 3 kids alone after my father died. I was 12 when I started stealing food just so my baby sister could eat. The honesty in his voice caught Maria off guard. She'd expected evasion, maybe a polite deflection. Instead, he was offering her a piece of his past that felt sacred and painful. What happened to her? Your sister? She died when she was 3. Pneumonia. We couldn't afford a doctor. Vincent's voice was steady, but his jaw tightened. I promised myself that night that I'd never be powerless again, that I'd never watch someone I cared about suffer because of money. Maria felt her breath catch. She looked down at Diego, healthy and warm in her arms, and imagined losing him to something as preventable as illness. The thought made her stomach turn. I'm sorry, she whispered. Vincent shook his head. Don't be sorry. Just understand that when I got your message tonight, it wasn't charity. It was personal. He finished unpacking and stepped back, surveying the small apartment with calculating eyes. Maria watched him take in the peeling paint, the broken window latch, the way the floorboards sagged near the kitchen. She braced herself for judgment, for the look of pity she'd grown used to seeing. Instead, Vincent pulled out his phone and made a call. Tony, I need you to contact Ramirez. Tell him I want to know who owns 247 Maple Street, everything. Financial records, maintenance history, tenant complaints. I want it all by tomorrow morning. Maria's eyes widened. What are you doing? Vincent ended the call and looked at her directly. This building should be condemned. The heat doesn't work properly. Half the windows don't lock. And I saw 3 fire code violations just walking up the stairs. No one should be raising a baby in these conditions. I can't afford anywhere else, Maria said quickly, fear creeping into her voice. Please don't report this place. They'll kick us out and we'll have nowhere to go. I'm not reporting anything, Vincent said calmly. I'm buying it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Maria stared at him, convinced she'd misheard. You're what? I'm going to buy this building. Fix it up properly. Make it safe for families like yours. Maria's legs felt weak. She sank onto the edge of her mattress, still holding Diego. That's insane. You don't even know me. You can't just buy a building because one tenant has problems. Vincent sat down in her single chair, making himself smaller, less intimidating. 6 months ago, I bought a restaurant because the owner was being extorted by some punk kids from the West Side. Last year, I took over a construction company because they were cheating their workers out of overtime pay. I've been looking for ways to do something meaningful with the resources I have. But why? What do you get out of it? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Diego. When my sister died, my mother stopped talking. Just completely shut down. She'd sit in her chair all day, staring at nothing. I tried everything to bring her back, but the guilt had eaten her alive. She died 2 years later, but really she died the night we lost Sophia. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. The pain in Vincent's voice was unmistakable, raw and unhealed, despite the years that had passed. I built everything I have on that anger, Vincent continued. The rage at a system that lets children die from poverty while other people waste money on things that don't matter. But anger only gets you so far. Eventually, you have to decide what you're going to do with the power you've accumulated. And you've decided to help struggling mothers? I've decided to help where I can make a real difference. Vincent leaned forward slightly. Maria, you sent that text to the wrong number, but it ended up exactly where it needed to be. I have resources you need, and you have something I've been missing. What's that? A reason to use those resources for something other than business. Maria looked around her tiny apartment, trying to process what was happening. A few hours ago, she'd been counting change in a grocery store, humiliated and desperate. Now a stranger was talking about buying buildings and changing lives like it was as simple as ordering coffee. This doesn't make sense, she said. People like you don't help people like me. People like me? Vincent's eyebrow raised slightly. Maria hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option left. Rich people, powerful people. You walk into my apartment wearing a coat that probably costs more than I make in a year. You make phone calls and people jump to attention. That's not normal. Vincent smiled, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked genuinely amused. You're right. It's not normal, but nothing about tonight has been normal. Diego had finished his bottle and was starting to fall asleep in Maria's arms. She looked down at his peaceful face, finally fed and content, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, hope was creeping in around the edges of her fear. What happens now? She asked. Now you get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll have people come look at this building. Professional contractors, not slumlords trying to squeeze profit out of desperation. They'll fix what's broken and upgrade what needs upgrading. And then what? You'll raise the rent and force everyone out anyway? Vincent shook his head. The rent stays exactly what it is now. I'm not looking to profit from this place. I'm looking to prove something. Prove what? That it's possible to use power to protect people instead of exploiting them. Maria studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. She'd learned to spot liars quickly in her young life. Landlords who promised repairs that never came. Employers who claimed they'd promote her and didn't. Social workers who said they'd find resources and disappeared. But Vincent's eyes held something different. A quiet intensity that reminded her of someone who'd made a promise to himself and intended to keep it. Why should I trust you? She asked. Because you don't have a choice, Vincent said simply. And because I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me prove myself. Diego stirred in her arms, making the soft noises babies make when they're dreaming. Maria looked down at him, then back at Vincent. What if you change your mind? What if you decide this was a mistake and walk away? Then you'll be exactly where you are right now, except with a better apartment and enough formula to last 6 months. The practical part of Maria's mind knew she should be more suspicious. She should ask harder questions, demand references, maybe even call the police to check if Vincent was wanted for something. But the desperate part of her mind, the part that had been slowly drowning for months, was grabbing onto this lifeline with both hands. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I'll let you help, but I want to contribute something too. I'm not looking for charity. Vincent leaned back in the chair, considering. What did you do before the diner? I was studying accounting at the community college. Had to drop out when Diego was born, but I was good at it. Numbers make sense to me. Can you spot irregularities? Things that don't add up? Maria nodded. I used to help other students with their assignments. I could always find the mistakes they missed. Then I have a job offer for you. Maria's heart jumped. What kind of job? I own several legitimate businesses. Restaurants, construction, real estate management. I need someone to review the books. Make sure my managers aren't skimming money or cutting corners in ways that hurt employees. You're offering me a job as your accountant? I'm offering you a job as my conscience, Vincent corrected. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle, who can spot when business decisions are hurting the people at the bottom. Maria felt her pulse quicken. A real job, with real pay, doing work she was actually good at. It seemed too perfect, too convenient. What's the catch? She asked. Vincent stood up, smoothing down his coat. The catch is that you'll be working for someone with a complicated reputation. Some of my business associates aren't the kind of people you'd invite to Sunday dinner. If you work for me, you'll need to be comfortable with that. Maria looked around her apartment again. At the broken window, the stained carpet, the empty refrigerator. At Diego, finally sleeping peacefully after hours of crying from hunger. How complicated. Complicated enough that you should think about it before you say yes. Vincent moved toward the door, then paused. I'll have groceries delivered tomorrow morning. Real food, not just baby supplies. The contractors will be here Monday to start repairs. Take the weekend to think about the job offer. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the small table next to the formula cans. That's my direct number. If you need anything, or if anyone gives you trouble about the building work, call me immediately. Maria nodded, still processing everything that had happened in the last hour. Vincent, he turned back to her. Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I need you to know how much this means. Vincent's expression softened. My mother never got the chance to see her children grow up healthy and safe. But you will. That's thanks enough. He opened the door, then looked back one more time. Maria, that text you sent tonight? It wasn't a mistake. It was exactly what was supposed to happen. After he left, Maria sat in her chair for a long time, holding Diego and staring at the bags of supplies that had appeared. In her life, like magic, she thought about Vincent's story, about the pain in his voice when he talked about his sister, about the way he'd looked at Diego, like he was seeing a ghost from his own past. For the first time in months, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future that didn't involve counting change for formula or choosing between rent and groceries. A future where Diego could grow up safe and fed and loved. Outside her window, the city hummed with its usual late-night energy. Somewhere out there, Vincent was probably returning to a world she couldn't imagine, full of power and money and the kind of influence that could buy buildings on a whim. But for one night, their worlds had collided in the most unexpected way, and somehow, in that collision, both of their lives had changed forever. Maria looked down at the business card Vincent had left behind. Simple white cardstock with just a name and phone number. No company logo, no title, no indication of what kind of empire she might be stepping into. Tomorrow she would have decisions to make. Tonight, she would simply hold her son and let herself believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe sent help exactly when you needed it most. Even if that help came from the most unlikely source imaginable. 3 months later, Maria found herself standing in front of a mirror she actually owned, in an apartment that didn't leak when it rained. The transformation felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. Diego babbled happily from his new crib, reaching for the mobile Vincent had insisted on buying. Not the cheap plastic kind she'd planned to get someday, but a handcrafted wooden one that played soft melodies. The accounting work had started slowly. Vincent brought her ledgers from his restaurant chain first, Simple books that let her ease back into the rhythm of numbers and calculations. She'd found 3 instances of managers skimming tips from servers, and one case where a supplier was overcharging for basic ingredients. Each discovery earned her a nod of approval from Vincent and a growing sense of her own value, but it was the construction company books that changed everything. Maria spread the documents across her kitchen table, Diego napping peacefully nearby. Something felt wrong in the payroll sections, patterns that didn't match the project timelines. Workers listed as full-time who seemed to vanish from records after just a few weeks. Overtime hours that appeared and disappeared without explanation. She'd learned to trust her instincts about numbers. They told stories that people tried to hide, revealed truths that got buried under complicated explanations. And this story made her stomach turn. The construction managers weren't just cheating workers out of overtime. They were hiring undocumented immigrants, working them brutal hours for below minimum wage, then firing them before payday and claiming they'd quit. The money that should have gone to wages was being pocketed by 3 different supervisors. Maria stared at the evidence she'd compiled, her hands trembling slightly. This wasn't about missing inventory or inflated supplier costs. This was about human beings being exploited, families struggling just like she had been, workers who probably had babies at home, mothers counting change for formula. She reached for her phone and dialed Vincent's number. "Find something?" His voice was calm, but she could hear the underlying tension. Vincent always knew when she was calling about serious irregularities. "The Riverside construction project," Maria said. "I need to show you something, but not over the phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When Vincent arrived, Maria had everything laid out in chronological order. Bank records, payroll sheets, employee files that told the story of systematic wage theft. He studied the documents in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. "How much?" he asked finally. "Over $400,000, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They stole over $400,000 from workers who needed every penny to survive." Vincent closed the last file and looked at her. Something had changed in his expression, a cold fury that reminded Maria exactly who she was working for. Those supervisors think they're untouchable because they assume their workers won't fight back. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to prove them wrong." Vincent stood up, straightening his coat. "Those workers are getting every dollar they're owed, plus interest. The supervisors are getting fired, and I'm making sure they never work in this city again. And the workers who are undocumented?" Vincent's smile was sharp. "Dangerous. They're getting legal help. I know lawyers who specialize in labor violations. Good ones." Maria watched him gather the documents, feeling something settle in her chest. This was why that wrong number text had found its way to Vincent, not just to save her and Diego, but to create something bigger. A partnership between someone who understood desperation and someone who had the power to do something about it. "Vincent?" she called as he reached the door. "Yeah? Thank you for seeing me as more than just someone who needed saving." He paused, looking back at her and Diego, who was reaching for his mother with tiny, trusting hands. "Thank you for showing me what power is actually for." 6 months later, Maria's wrong number had become the foundation of something neither of them had expected. Vincent's legitimate businesses were thriving, cleaned up by Maria's careful attention to detail. The apartment building on Maple Street had become a model for affordable housing done right. And most importantly, Diego was growing up healthy, safe, and surrounded by people who proved that sometimes the most unlikely connections create the most powerful changes. When one desperate text had saved 2 lives and transformed dozens more, sometimes the wrong number turns out to be exactly the right call.